Hi, this is Steve with DECWARE. Today I would like to talk about Open Baffle speakers a little bit. You can see a pair behind me in front of the curtain. This is where I store that particular pair when I'm not using them because I am out of space in this room. You wouldn't want to listen to them up there because there would be no bass and almost no soundstage depth. An open baffle speaker needs to have between a couple of feet and a couple of meters of space between it and the wall behind it. Since the back of the speaker is open, it washes the wall with sound and reflects it back to the listener. To have this reflection somewhat time aligned with the sound coming off the front of the speaker requires some experimentation with placement. Width, on the other hand, is really forgiving. I have successfully placed them with only a meter of gap between them all the way to as wide as the room, with the sides of the baffles literally touching the side walls. This is possible because there is no lower frequencies and very little sound in general at the sides of the speakers. Box and horn speakers have lower frequencies that are omnidirectional and therefore interact with the four main boundaries of your room, causing bass holes and bass peaks in your listening space. Since an open baffle speaker has no bass on the sides, there are only two main boundaries to deal with instead of four, which reduces your bass problems by 50%. If you had a pair of conventional speakers and you installed bass traps in your listening space, you would only need half as many with open baffles. Another reason the bass is so good with these boxless speakers is because there is no box to color the sound or add compression to the lower frequencies. Without these two things, the bass actually sounds real and textured. In fact, with high sensitivity full range drivers like the ones in the baffles behind me from Lee Song, the textures have texture. Additionally, because these types of drivers have such low mass, they are very fast. That means that the bass and the mid-range are the same speed as the highs. You don't get that from a three-way loudspeaker, nor do you get a point source, which is the theoretical ideal. Another thing that is the scourge of many loudspeakers is the crossovers. A great crossover will cost more than the speaker, so they are rare, and the norm is cheap crossover parts that diminish the sound quality of the speaker. So what happens is you get drawn into a rabbit hole of buying exotic capacitors and coils for your speaker crossovers that can easily total up over $1,000 or $2,000. The only thing I've heard sound better than these exotic crossover parts is no crossover parts. Just a single voice coil connected directly to the output of an amplifier can destroy a $100,000 pair of speakers if your yardstick is to see how deep you can hear into the music. That is assuming your amplifier can get out of the way, which many can't. But assuming the best instead of the worst, those speakers behind me are like the James Webb Telescope, when the reference has always been Hubble. You'll have a lot of engineers get all puffed up and explain that you can't get a single driver to do all of the frequencies without distortions, claiming that bass frequencies will modulate the mid-range and cause a type of Doppler distortion. But this comes from pro audio, where you have large spaces and crowds of people. In a house, at least with the gear you see behind me, no such thing exists. The speaker cone at room-filling playback levels does not move enough to be seen. In other words, as you feel the bass hit your chest from these single-driver speakers, you cannot see the cones moving. Quite the opposite of so many power-hungry audiophile speakers with woofers huffing and puffing to the bass, which, by the way, remind me of plungers for your toilet and can sometimes even sound similar. I can assure you that at normal listening levels, the 10-inch drivers in the baffles behind me, driven by our low-power tube gear, would be far more dynamic than a tower speaker stacked with woofers on a big amplifier, such that dominate Axpona and audio shows around the world. This is because of speed, which translates to linearity, and the lack of any filtering from a crossover or heavily feedback-laden amplifier. A lot of audiophiles are missing the boat because they think it can't possibly be that simple. It is. Have a great day, and happy